And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Grover Washington Jr., his biography and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. Let's start with Skylarkin, released on Motown Records in 1980. Often labeled Grover's commercial venture, some critics even joke parts sounded like elevator music. But beneath the polish, Grover's saxophone is unmistakably expressive, warm and full of life. The album balances covers like Steve Wonder's I Can't Help It with originals, each track offering contrasting moods. Electric keyboards, subtle guitars and delicate background vocals provide a smooth, cohesive texture that signals Grover's shift towards crossover appeal while retaining depth. Next up, Winelight, released later that same year, representing Grover's artistic and commercial peak. Featuring the Grammy-winning hit Just the Two of Us with Bill Withers, it also contains 5 instrumental tracks that showcase his mastery on tenor, soprano and alto saxophones. From the cinematic warmth of the title track to the groove-driven elegance of Let It Flow for Dr. J, the album marries accessibility with musical integrity. Co-produced with Ralph MacDonald and supported by top-tier musicians Marcus Miller, Richard T., Steve Gadd, Winelight demonstrates how smooth jazz could captivate a broad audience without sacrificing artistry. Finally, Come Morning, released in 1981, leans into lush late-night textures. Synthesizers, background vocals and refined arrangements create a romantic atmospheric soundscape. While not producing a pop phenomenon on the scale of Winelight, it solidified Grover's reputation for mood-driven expressive jazz. Collaborators like Eric Gale, Richard T. and Marcus Miller helped deliver a cohesive, polished experience that emphasized melody and intimacy. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Grover Washington Jr., his biography and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. So we're going to be spotlighting 3 albums that trace his journey from accessible textures to cultural landmark status. Skylarkin from 1980, Winelight also from 1980, and the romantic Come Morning from 1981. Let's start with Skylarkin, released on Motown Records in 1980. This album often gets labeled as Grover's commercial venture, and yes, some critics have playfully called parts of it elevator music. But let's not oversimplify. Underneath that polish, Grover's sax is still in full voice. Melodies are warm and the moods are smoother, but they still hold depth. Skylarkin is an interesting study in balance. Familiar covers like Stevie Wonder's I Can't Help It sitting alongside originals, all delivered with a mix of tempos and textures. Some tracks lean lighter, some let Grover's saxophone cut through with unexpected clarity. Check out Bright Moments, which captures a playful, airy side, versus Snake Eyes, darker and more contemplative. Electric keyboards, smooth guitars, subtle background vocals. It's a polished sound, perhaps less risky than his 70s work, but there's a warmth and comfort in that polish. Skylarkin is a perfect springboard to talk about Grover's evolution towards smooth crossover, how he broadened his audience while keeping his instrumental voice intact. In fact, pairing a track from Skylarkin with something from Mr. Magic or Live at the Bijou highlights a shift in texture and risk, from funkier, more adventurous grooves to that welcoming melodic sheen. Next up, what many people consider Grover's masterpiece, Winelight. Released in October 1980, this album cemented its place not just in jazz but in popular music culture. Most famously, it includes Just the Two of Us with Bill Withers, a song that became a crossover hit, a Grammy-winning song and culturally iconic. But let's not forget the rest of the album. 5 instrumental tracks that showcase Grover's expressive range on tenor, soprano and alto saxophones. Winelight balances commercial appeal with musical integrity. Instrumentals like the title track Winelight, Let It Flow and Make Me a Memory create lush soundscapes where subtle solos breathe over grooves that are warm, cinematic and elegant. Co-produced with Ralph MacDonald and featuring top-tier musicians Marcus Miller on bass, Richard T. on keys, Steve Gadd on drums, the album is understated, yet every note serves the melody and the mood. Critics have occasionally noted that the vocal track can overshadow the instrumentals, but in reality, it's the instrumental work that truly exhibits Grover's artistry, the phrasing, the tone and the nuance. Finally, let's glide into Come Morning, released in 1981. Coming off the immense success of Winelight, this album leans further into smooth production, incorporating background vocals, synthesizers and programming elements. Some reviewers call it mood music, and indeed it is, lush, romantic and evocative, perfect for late-night listening. Tracks here emphasize atmospheric over flash, with Grover's melodic voice up front and center. Collaborators include familiar faces like Richard T., Eric Gale and Marcus Miller, all contributing to that polished, cohesive sound. While Come Morning may not have produced a chart-topping hit on the scale of Just the Two of Us, it was a gold-certified album that remains a favorite for fans who appreciate romance and texture in jazz. So from Skylarkin to Winelight to Come Morning, we trace a fascinating arc. Skylarkin shows the transition, commercial polish meeting sax craftsmanship. Winelight demonstrates the peak, commercial success, critical acclaim and the instrumental mastery that cemented Grover's legacy. And Come Morning reveals the artist's response to fame and expectation, emphasizing mood, romance and the comforts of lush production. Whether you're hearing the crisp, playful lines on bright moments, the cultural phenomenon on Just the Two of Us, or the intimate late-night shimmer of Come Morning, Grover Washington Jr. proves that smoothness need not compromise substance. And in all three albums, the listener gets both the groove and the heart, melody and the soul, a masterclass in accessible yet deeply expressive jazz. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Grover Washington Jr., his biography and best hits. Now it's time for some trending music news. The Annapolis Jazz and Roots Festival is back this November 7 through 16. Now in its fourth year, the festival spreads across 8 stunning venues in historic Annapolis, celebrating this year's theme, World Travelers and Hometown Heroes. Things kick off on Friday, November 7th at the historic Peerless Rents with a tribute to Eva Cassidy, featuring Alexis Tantor and Letitia Van Sant. 2 shows, 6 and 8 p.m. Tickets $25 to $35. Weekend highlights: on Saturday, check out Sacred Spaces with artist Jabari Jefferson. Then groove with the J.C. Jefferson Quartet honoring Quincy Jones. Sunday, funk it up with the Michael McHenry Tribe. Weekend 2 starts Friday, November 14th with the Unified Jazz Ensemble revisiting jazz greats like Duke Ellington and Betty Goodman. Saturday features Edward Rybeck Trio and Footwork's Percussive Dance Ensemble, celebrating the legacy of Eileen Carson Schatz. The festival closes Sunday, November 16th with the Freedom Choir and a grand finale by the Joshua Redman Quartet at Maryland Hall. Tickets priced from $25 to $85. From soulful jazz to world rhythms, Annapolis is the place to be this November. Check out ajrfestival.org for schedules, ticket and artist info. And that was some trending music news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Grover Washington Jr.'s best albums of all time. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Grover Washington Jr., his biography and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. The first one's called Inside Moves, released in 1984. This one finds Grover navigating the era's polished production trends. Synthesizers, layered backgrounds and vocal features, John Lucien on several tracks define its sound. Critics offered mixed reviews, noting that vocals sometimes overshadows the sax, but the artistry beneath remains. Tracks like the title track showcase Grover's expressive tone, lyrical phrasing and rhythmic interplay. The album reflects a turning point. His signature voice meets commercial pressures, balancing lush contemporary textures with glimpses of the adventurous spirit from earlier works like Mr. Magic or Live at the Bijou. 3 years later, Strawberry Moon, released in 1987, Grover's first studio album for Columbia Records, emphasizes refinement and maturity. Collaborating with Marcus Miller, Michael J. Powell and vocalists like Gene Carney, this album blends smooth production with well-crafted arrangements. Singles like The Summer Nights charted on R&B lists, highlighting his crossover appeal. More than experimentation, this album consolidates his strengths. Tone, phrasing, and expressive capabilities remain intact. Listeners can hear a balance between accessible polished smoothness and musical integrity. Finally, All My Tomorrows, released in 1994, embraces a fully acoustic approach, marking a reflective, intimate chapter in Grover's career. Standards and ballads dominate, with subtle chord arrangements featuring Hank Jones, Romero Labambo, and acoustic bass and drums. Tracks like E Preciso Perdua showcase understated lyrical saxophone playing. Across Inside Moves, Strawberry Moon, and All My Tomorrows, we trace Grover Washington Jr.'s journey, navigating commercial pressures, consolidating mastery, and ultimately embracing acoustic reflection. It's a story of evolution, expression, and the enduring power of his saxophone voice. And that was some insight into what's coming up during this hour, and you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. 3 albums: Inside Moves from 1984, Strawberry Moon from 1987, and All My Tomorrows, his 1994 acoustic gem. Starting in the mid-80s, Inside Move represents Grover navigating the changing musical landscape. Released in 1984, this electro album leads into the era's taste for polished production, synthesizers and vocal tracks. John Lucien features prominently across several songs. Critics have given it mixed reviews. Some felt the material lacked memorability, and high proportion of vocals and background layers made it one of Grover's weaker electro offerings. But let's dig a little deeper, because within that sheen, Grover's artistry still shines. Tracks like the title track, Inside Moves, and Dawn Song show his sax tone at its expressive best. Funk grooves persist, rhythmic interplay sparkles, and even in quieter moments, his lyrical phrasing stands out. Alto, tenor, soprano, and baritone saxophones interact with electric keyboards, synthesizers, and layered studio production. Inside Moves is a turning point, where Grover's signature sound meets the more commercial R&B influenced production pressures of the mid-80s. Juxtaposing it with an easier groove-heavy album like Mr. Magic or a live set like Live at the Bijou shows clearly what was gained: lush contemporary textures and what some listeners felt was lost: raw, adventurous risk-taking. 3 years later, Grover returned with Strawberry Moon, his first studio album for Columbia Records in 1987. While not a blockbuster in the mainstream sense, critics recognized that Grover's playing remained on prime form. He was collaborating partly with Marcus Miller and Michael J. Powell, blending smooth, warm production with well-crafted arrangements. Vocal tracks feature artists like Gene Khan, while singles like Summer Nights charted on R&B lists. What's notable about Strawberry Moon is how it consolidates Grover's strengths rather than pushing boundaries. His tone, phrasing, and expressive capabilities are intact, offering listeners a refined, mature sound. By this stage, Grover isn't necessarily chasing crossover hits or testing the limits of funk. He's focused on expressing what he wants through melody and mood. This album reflects the commercial pressures and listener expectations of the late 1980s, but also the artistry of a musician confident in his voice. Finally, we arrive at the early 90s with Almighty Tomorrows, released in 1994. This album is a departure in tone from his earlier electric and funk-heavy works. Here, Grover embraces an all-acoustic approach, emphasizing standards, ballads, and lyrical understated playing. The opening track, E Preciso Perdua, a bossa nova featuring guitarist Ramiro Lambambo, immediately sets the mood, intimate, timeless, and classic. The personal support this song, Hank Jones on piano, acoustic bass, subtle drums are caught in many places. There's a quiet intimacy here, deliberate pacing that allows Grover's phrasing and tone to resonate fully. So across Inside Moves, Strawberry Moon, and All My Tomorrows, we see a fascinating narrative. In Inside Moves, Grover navigates commercial pressures while maintaining his lyrical voice. Strawberry Moon consolidates his strength, offering warm, polished performances for both fans and casual listeners. And All My Tomorrows provides a reflective acoustic finale, a testament to a lifetime of mastery, showing that even decades in, Grover's music could still surprise, charm, and deeply move. Whether it's a mid-80s synth sheen, the late 80s smooth warmth, or the early 90s acoustic intimacy, Grover Washington Jr. proves time and again that melody, phrasing, and expressive saxophone playing transcend trends. And that was some insight into some of Grover Washington Jr.'s best albums of all time. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Grover Washington Jr., his biography, and best hits. We've come to an end of this week's episode of the Jazz Update, so now it's time to recap what we're discussing during this program. Grover Washington Jr., born December 12, 1943 in Buffalo, New York, was one of the pioneers of smooth jazz and a master of the soprano, alto, and tenor saxophones. From a young age, he showed prodigious talent, starting with piano and clarinet before setting on the saxophone. He started at Morgan State University in Baltimore, where he honed his craft and connected with other budding jazz musicians. By the late 1960s, Grover was performing in R&B and jazz circuits, developing a style that was as soulful as it was technically brilliant. His breakthrough came in the mid-1970s with albums like Feel So Good and Mr. Magic. He was a true crossover artist, bridging genres and audiences. Live performances were central to his artistry. Albums like Live at the Bijou captured his ability to connect with audiences, delivering energy and spontaneity that studio recordings couldn't always replicate. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Grover continued to innovate, releasing albums like Skylarking and All My Tomorrows, exploring smooth textures, vocal collaborations, and acoustic jazz. His style influenced countless musicians and helped redefine the sound of modern jazz. Grover Washington Jr. passed away on December 17, 1999, but his music lives on, celebrated for its warmth, soul, and groove. He left behind a legacy as one of the most beloved saxophonists in jazz history, a musician who could make every note feel personal and every melody unforgettable. And that was some insight into the biography and best hits of Grover Washington Jr. And that brings me to an end of this week's episode of the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. You can check out the archives of today's program on my YouTube channel, The Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan. So I'll see you again next week. Have a great week ahead.